Have you ever gotten home from a shopping trip, looked at your bags and thought, wait, I didn't mean to buy all this? Or maybe you found yourself just scrolling and scrolling on an app long after you told yourself you were done. Well, it turns out that's probably not a failure of willpower, it's the result of a very carefully designed system. We're about to pull back the curtain on the hidden psychological forces that brands use to influence just about every single purchasing decision you make.
You know, we all like to think we're in the driver's seat. We operate under this powerful assumption that we are rational shoppers. We tell ourselves we walk down the aisles, we browse websites, and we pick out products based on pure logic, what we need, and what our budget is. We believe we're in control.
But what if that feeling of control is actually the most convincing trick of all? What if the choices you feel like you're making on your own have been subtly steered for you long before you even walked in the store or opened that app?
The reality is, our brains have become the target. Brands are now experts in behavioral economics and neuroscience. They create these environments, both physical and digital, that are specifically engineered to sidestep our conscious, logical mind and talk directly to our deepest impulses. So how exactly do they pull this off? Well, in this explainer, we're going to break it down. We're going to look at 6 key battlefronts. We'll start inside our own heads with our 2 competing brain systems. Then we'll explore the engineered mazes of retail stores, the way our senses are manipulated, the deceptions hidden in pricing, the addictive traps of the digital world, and finally, the ultimate prize, making a brand a part of your identity. So let's start with the fundamental weakness that all of these strategies exploit. And it's not something you'll find on a shelf or on a screen. It's hardwired directly into our own biology.
The Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman came up with this idea of 2 modes of thinking. System 1 is our autopilot. It's fast, emotional, and completely instinctual, and it drives something like 95% of our daily choices. System 2, well, that's the complete opposite. It's slow, it's logical, and it takes real conscious effort. It's the system you use to solve a difficult math problem. And the entire game of selling is designed to keep you firmly planted in System 1, because the second you pause and let that logical System 2 kick in, the impulse buying spell can be broken.
And this is where it gets really interesting. Brain scans actually show us a literal tug-of-war happening inside our heads when we think about buying something. When you see a product you really want, it lights up the nucleus accumbens. That's the brain's reward center, the part that anticipates pleasure. But when you look at the price tag, a different area activates, the insula, which also processes physical pain. A sale only happens if that delicious anticipation of reward can overpower the sting of paying. So brands really have 2 jobs: make that reward signal as loud as possible, and do everything they can to muffle the pain signal.
Okay, so knowing about this internal battle, let's look at how brands engineer the physical world all around us to tip that neural scale in their favor.
IKEA is an absolute master of this. That famous one-way path, it's not for convenience, it's a deliberate strategy. It forces you to see every single product. Then they place these huge, messy bins of cheap items, what they actually call bulla bulla, to create this illusion of a massive bargain, and that triggers our instinct to dig for a deal. The winding path makes you feel like you're on a journey of discovery. And then, at the very end of that long trek, you're rewarded with a cheap hot dog. Thanks to something called the peak end rule, that positive ending makes you remember the entire exhausting experience more fondly.
Now, Costco plays a different game, but it's just as powerful. First, there's the membership fee. That can trigger what's called the sunk cost fallacy. You feel this pressure to spend more just to make that initial investment feel worth it. Then, notice they have almost no signs on the aisles. That's on purpose. It forces you to wander, to get lost, and to stumble upon things you never knew you needed. That famous $4.99 rotisserie chicken, it's a loss leader. It acts as a powerful value anchor that makes everything else in your cart seem like a fantastic deal by comparison. And by constantly changing their inventory, they create artificial scarcity and a serious fear of missing out.
And this just shows you the mind-boggling scale of their strategy. Costco sells half, 50% of all the cashews in the entire world. This reinforces that feeling of bulk value. When our brain sees a massive container of something, it doesn't really bother calculating the price per unit. It just responds to the sheer abundance, which can kick in an old evolutionary hoarding instinct to grab resources while you can.
But of course, it's not just about the layout of the store. Brands are also manipulating the very air we breathe and the sounds we hear to completely bypass our logical brain and speak directly to our emotional centers. This quote from Starbucks founder is so telling,
Back in 2008, he temporarily pulled breakfast sandwiches from the menu because he knew the Starbucks brand wasn't just a product, it was an experience tied to a very specific smell. Scent has a direct hotline to the parts of our brain that handle emotion and memory. To him, losing the right smell meant losing the entire brand.
And the music you hear in a store is no accident either. As you can see, slow-tempo music in supermarkets actually encourages you to move slower, which means you see more products and, you guessed it, spend more money. A fast food joint, on the other hand, will use up-tempo music to get you to eat faster and increase table turnover. And studies have actually found that playing classical music in a wine store leads customers to buy more expensive bottles because the music subtly primes their brain for concepts like quality and sophistication.
All right, let's talk about the numbers themselves. The thing is, the human brain doesn't have some kind of internal meter for what something is truly worth. We only really understand value in relative terms, and marketers exploit this to their absolute advantage. Okay, so in a classic study, people were given 2 subscription options for The Economist magazine. As you see here, about 68% chose the cheaper web-only option. This feels like a pretty logical System 2 decision, right? It's a simple comparison, and most people went for the lower price. But then, the researchers added a third, seemingly useless option, a print-only subscription for the exact same price as the print and web bundle. And just look at what happened. The results completely flipped. A stunning 84% of people now chose the most expensive option. That useless decoy wasn't useless at all. It made the $125 bundle look like an unbelievable deal, and it completely short-circuited logical thinking.
So what in the world is going on there? It all comes down to a cognitive bias called anchoring. Our brain has this tendency to latch onto the very first number it sees and use that as a reference point. So a sale price of $70 might seem high on its own, but when it's anchored to an original price of $100, it doesn't feel like you're spending $70 anymore, it feels like you're gaining $30.
Now, these psychological tricks aren't just for physical stores. Oh no. They have been translated and in many ways amplified in the online world through what are sometimes called dark patterns. Take the classic subscription trap, what designers sometimes call a roach motel. It is incredibly easy to get in, one click for a free trial. But getting out? That's a whole other story. Suddenly you have to call customer service or navigate these complicated menus. The design relies on one simple fact. Even a tiny bit of friction is often enough to make us just give up and keep paying.
And this right here, this is the engine that makes apps like TikTok so addictive. You swipe, and maybe you see a fantastic video, or maybe you see a total dud. You just don't know. This unpredictable pattern is called a variable reward schedule, and it turns out it spikes dopamine in your brain far more powerfully than a consistent, predictable reward ever could. It's the exact same psychological mechanism that makes slot machines so utterly compelling. But maybe the ultimate goal of all this selling psychology is something much, much deeper than just getting you to make a single purchase. It's to fuse a brand's identity with your own sense of self.
Hey, remember assembling that IKEA furniture? Well, that's not a bug, it's a feature. Researchers actually call this the IKEA effect. The effort you personally invest in building something makes you value that item way more than if you had just bought it pre-assembled. You're not just a consumer anymore, you feel like a creator. That labor, which is technically a cost to you, gets psychologically transformed into a benefit, pride of ownership.
And this really gets to the very heart of it all. These techniques aren't just about selling a cup of coffee or bookshelf. They work by presenting a version of reality where buying things is the solution to our emotional and social needs. In a very real sense, they are shaping how we see the world and our own place within it.
So the idea here isn't to feel powerless. It's about being aware. By understanding the game, you can start to spot it being played all around you. And the next time you feel that powerful, sudden urge to buy something, you can just pause, engage that logical System 2 brain, and ask yourself one simple but very powerful question. Do I actually need this, or has my brain just been hijacked?